This episode of The Power of Perspective is sponsored by Food for the Hungry, an organization that has helped me and helps us bring epic change into lives of those who have less and who are in need. Hi, I'm Anthony Evans.
I'm Stacy Kaiser.
And this is The Power of Perspective. The Power of Perspective is a series of conversations that we're gonna have about things that we all have or will go through. My desire, along with Stacy, is to make sure that you come to the conclusion that lifelong change can happen when you realize the power of your perspective. Hey, welcome back to The Power of Perspective. I'm so excited, as always, to be here with my friend, Stacy Kaiser, who is a beast of a psychotherapist, and I enjoy her a lot. Today, we're talking about emotional trauma, like emotional pain and trauma, and how to deal with it. And so I think as all these subjects, you've helped me out a lot on, but this one especially too, like actually dealing with stuff. So let's just get into it, Stacy. What are some of the first steps that you can take in dealing with emotional trauma and pain?
So I always say that the first most important thing is to even realize that you have it. Because a lot of times people just feel a heaviness and a burden, and they don't actually try to assess, like, where is this coming from? Because emotional pain can come from when you're a child, it can come from baggage that you've picked up along the way, and it can come from a situation that you're in right now. And it might even be that it's not a horrible situation, but you have like a lot of stress, and that's causing emotional pain. So that realization is really important. Then the second thing to do is to begin to ask yourself, like, how is this affecting my life? And how is it like hurting me? Which ways are being damaged by it? And then the third would be to start working towards healing it by talking about it, possibly seeking counseling, leaning on support systems from like friends, experts, spiritual advisors, and things like that.
When you talk about dealing with stuff or talking about your feelings, I was immediately thinking about all the people, we've addressed this a little bit, who think that talking about your feelings is like not a thing. I know that there's like a stigma on therapy, as we mentioned, but there's a stigma on, to me, emoting, especially amongst males, on actually dealing with all that stuff. What would you say directed toward that stigma and why it's important to not?
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. We got a lot of questions about people who were like dealing with feelings of depression and stuff. Yeah. And oftentimes those depression feelings, if they're not chemical, are because you're holding your feelings back. You don't need to cry in front of everyone. You don't need to emote in front of everyone. You just need to find a space to do it. I literally know people who just get emotional in their car, and they will just let their feelings out, whatever it is. And it might be anger. Only I do know somebody that dented a dashboard, so you want to be careful if it's anger that you're dealing with. But you want to be able to talk about your feelings and express them. And I also think expressing feelings doesn't mean necessarily that you're yelling or crying. It might just mean that you're talking about them. And you need to find a safe person to do that with.
Yeah, and I found one, and y'all have all found one. I'm telling you, I'm vouching for her. So I know y'all all can't just talk to her, but this is a very safe place. And she's made me feel that way with dealing with some emotions. I think that you said to me, I mean, it's probably been years ago, and I watched too much TV on a specific channel that makes you think you can remodel houses real quick and do it real easy in a week. That doesn't happen. So I got this house, I was remodeling this house, and Stacy used it as an example in my life. And you said, Anthony, what do you have to do first before you start remodeling that house that I had? And she kept asking me, and I was like, I don't understand. She's like, before you can do any renovations to a house, you have to first own it. You have to go through the process of what it takes to actually own it. You can't just walk in and be like, oh, I like this place, and start knocking down walls. And I feel like expressing your emotions and actually getting them out and kind of even trying to dig, if you don't know what it is, digging down to actually what it is you doing the work it takes to own it. And once you own something, then you can actually make changes to it that help your emotional state. Yeah,
that's 100% true. You have to basically own it and know what is going on inside of you. Now, one thing that I want to caution people about is a lot of people beat themselves up for having emotional pain. Like, I shouldn't be upset about this.
Yeah.
Or they do that thing where it's like, oh, well, so-and-so has it worse, so I shouldn't be upset. It's like, your pain is your pain, and different people have different reactions to it, and you should be allowed to have your pain, deal with your pain, feel your pain, and hopefully move on from your pain.
Yeah, you stopped me last week in our session, like the regular ones that we have. You stopped me when I was talking about my mom, and I was talking about how much it feels, how horrible it feels, and I said, but some other people have gone through, and you were like, no. Like, you're not going to minimize your pain by discussing what other people have gone through that's worse than you. And I thought that was very important because it was a way of almost me kind of passing over and dismissing or trying to make my stuff small. But I don't think making it small doesn't help because it's still there. Like even if you try to make it minimize it. And that was very, very helpful to me in dealing with it.
I literally posted something on Instagram today about the fact that if you try to hide your pain, it comes out in other places. It can impact your work. It can impact your physical well-being. You get stomach aches, headaches, not sleeping at night.
You eat.
You eat too much. You can actually end up in bad relationships because you'll say to yourself, oh, well, their problems are actually worse than mine. So I'm going to spend time with them and focus on them and their problems and not pay attention to your own. And so it's really, really important that you do sort of a personal assessment.
Now, once you figure out what's going on with you, like once you dig down, I remember telling my dad growing up, I feel like I have a cinder block on my chest because I was just going through a lot of things in my head. But once you figure that out, then where are you going after that? Like once you figure out, I've done the work and I figured out what's causing me the problem emotionally.
So then what you want to do is really think about like what your strengths are. What are you good at? So me, I'm really good at reaching out to other people and getting advice and talking to people. So for me, it would be that I would go talk to other people about how to solve my situation. But anyway, you want to start to problem solve it. You literally want to say, what would be the steps that I can take in order to make this better? And now it might just not completely erase the pain, especially if it's something from the past. But I actually think this is a really good example. Some people will have a painful childhood.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I'm
a lot of people.
So there's nothing I can do about that. You can go talk to whoever it is if they're still around. And frankly, you can even talk to them if they're gone. You can speak. You can write a letter you never send. You can also find ways to heal. So if you feel like you were neglected in your childhood or abused, you can go spend time around other kids and make them feel good and so it doesn't have to be your own kid even. It could be a niece, a nephew, somebody who you can make feel good and sort of heal the wounds that way. The other things that you can do is literally figure out like what are some things that bring me joy that I was not able to do during those difficult times and focus on doing those.
You can redeem that time that way, which I believe from a faith perspective and from the actual therapy perspective, I believe that God will give back to you. When you do that kind of work, God will give back to you those years you lost. And what's crazy is I have great parents and all that stuff, but there were some things that went on when I was younger that my parents didn't even know really that were affecting me as it relates to what they were doing, like how big the ministry got and how big, like they didn't know. My mom told me this. She said, I used to thank God that we had an easy child. And she said that in response to me going, I felt like I was neglected at times. So I felt neglected, but she was simultaneously thanking God that we have one easy child that doesn't need anything from us because I kept that quiet. I didn't say anything. So I brought this up at 27, like I was grown, 27, so like a year ago, but it wasn't a year ago. But I brought that up, and it was 2 years. I got resolved bringing something up that happened when I was 12 and 13. Being willing to talk about it because I was a snappy person. My family knew me as the one with the attitude. I didn't realize my attitude was based in not dealing with stuff that happened when I was 12. I didn't know. And thankfully at that time I had the privilege of being able to talk to my parents about it. And I'll never forget my dad walking down the hallway after me explaining this whole scenario to him of how I felt as a child, and him walking in my room and saying, I am so sorry. I had no idea. And that apology from my dad, I know we all can't get apologies, getting it out with some healing. And then obviously my dad apologizing on top of that, but I would have never experienced that healing that happened in my life. Like I have calmed down as a human being. I'm not as ready to pop off on people because I got those feelings out. I'm
glad you said that because almost every day I talk to somebody that's holding things in. And sometimes you just need to tell someone. You need to be a witness. It could be anyone that you tell. It could be a social media community that you share with.
Yeah.
Just to take the burden off of your chest.
Yeah. A lot of people have actually shared with their I'm hoping that gives them some resolve to know that we're looking at some of these questions. We're again trying to get to them all, but we'll have to try really hard because
that's
a lot.
That's why we're trying to broad stroke.
Yeah.
But we did read them all.
Yes, we did read your questions. For those of you, that's actually a great point. For those of you who are like, but they're not answering my specific question. There were hundreds of them, so we're trying to broad stroke it. So hopefully you'll get some out. But this means that we just have to do more of these because we'll be having to try for a minute to get to everybody's topics and subjects. Now, what do you say to people dealing with emotional pain. Now, I am by far not a doctor. Stacy's not an MD, so I don't want to confuse anything. But people who, there were a lot of questions asking about medication versus not, and all that stuff. Like, when do you know, especially faith stuff, because Christians are like, a lot of times, don't do that. Like, pray. You don't need to do something to help you emotionally. Like, how do you know when I should maybe think about that or talk about that? And again, it's a sensitive subject.
Right. Well, I can tell you that a lot of people find prayer to be something that provides them comfort and healing. If you have found that that is not doing it, then I recommend that you go to your medical doctor. There are chemical depressions, there are chemical anxieties, very much like people who need glasses. That's not something that you can just pray or wish or hope away. You need glasses to see. And so there are people who actually are walking around with chemical issues that can be improved with medication, and the doctors have ways that they can, figure out what that is. The other thing that you can ask yourself is it situational? Are you in a situation that is causing these feelings? And if you are, how do you either improve the situation, distance from the situation, or get out of the situation? I literally knew somebody who was popping anxiety pills, and lo and behold, they dropped their best friend. They stopped. Their best friend was, and the anxiety went away. Because the best friend was constantly like needing them and pulling on them, and she was always feeling like, do I go with the best friend? Do I go to work? Do I go with the best friend? Do I tend to my family? And once that best friend and her stopped talking,
I was about to tell you guys that one of the things that I dealt with a while ago was I got in a scenario that was so emotionally taxing and toxic for me that I could not pull myself up emotionally. I remember calling my dad and being like, yo, I think I need help. Like I was talking to, it was in Nashville, I was talking to a therapist in Nashville who suggested maybe you need a little something in this moment because you keep dipping because of how heavy this is. You keep dipping below where you don't even have the motivation to try to get yourself out. So I was very hesitant, and a lot of people don't know this about me, y'all do now, that I got on a short round of medication to keep me from dipping.
Some people do that situationally.
It was situational, but I didn't just take that medicine. I took it for a minute and also did the work so that I could stop taking it to get me out. It wasn't like, this will help. Now I'm gonna go and what you said, just kind of stay put and take these pills to get me out. That wasn't it, but it kept me from bottoming out because I would bottom out and not want to get out of bed. So and then I did the work, and then a few months later I was like, oh, I don't need that anymore because I'm actually distanced from but basically what you mentioned about that girl.
And that's how you know that you don't have a chemical issue.
Oh,
because
got you.
If you had a chemical issue, when you went off of it, you would have still needed it.
Which is one of the questions. Somebody who's been on it for years and years who said,
somebody asked that question. So that's how you begin to know. It's kind of like someone can borrow someone's glasses to read a menu, but if you need glasses all the time, you need glasses all the time. Medication is very much the same way.
That's very interesting.
I want to talk about cortisol. Do you know what that is? Most people do not.
Yes, because you mentioned it. One of my friends.
Did I give you that?
No. One of my friends has talked to me about his cortisol levels and how they're not regulated, and it's actually he's off, not off, but he feels off because his cortisol levels are
okay.
Yeah, but tell me.
Most people do not know what it is, but I'm totally fascinated by this now, so I'm going to share it.
Okay,
Which
go.
is cortisol is the stress hormone that is inside of all of our bodies.
Oh yeah.
When we feel stressed out, our body releases cortisol so that we can run or fight or manage the stress. It feels a little bit like adrenaline, you all know what it feels like when you're in an adrenaline situation, but it literally gives us the energy that we need to do things. If you are constantly under stress, constantly in emotional pain, your body is constantly releasing cortisol, and that will wear your body out. You will find yourself exhausted. And so I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but then all of a sudden you spend a weekend off or you're on vacation and you're like, oh my gosh, I slept 10 hours last night and I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Well, that's because your body has been releasing too much cortisol. So it's really important if you are in emotional pain on a regular basis, stressed out on a regular basis, that you give your cortisol and your body a break, and that you take moments where you literally are practicing self-care, where you take a hot bath, you go on a quiet, peaceful walk, you light a candle, you sit and drink a cup of coffee with a peaceful and relaxing friend. Things where your body can sort of start to relax, the cortisol can get a break, and you aren't literally exhausting yourself.
Yes, I have I heard about that now as related to my friend, but then also when we were doing a bunch of research as related to our mom and like, how did this happen? That cortisol came up because she lived at such a high stress level. And again, I'm not saying that this is what created it, but I also heard when cortisol levels are that high, your body is using the energy now to like exert external stuff and isn't as readily available to fight what's actually going on.
Correct.
Like, right?
That's
like
why
medic,
people who are
like
not well really need to rest.
Yeah.
That's why they tell you, oh, you're sick or you have whatever, you need to rest, because it forces your body to, relax.
That's so interesting. So I've actually been in scenarios where my cortisol levels, work scenarios and
we all have.
relationship scenarios where I kind of feel like that all the time, and then I do have these crazy moments of crashing.
Right, and then you'll find when you're in those situations, your brain doesn't work as well. You feel like you need to eat more carbs because you're like, I need sugar, I need carbs
Yep,
to give
felt
you
that
energy, and you're not sleeping well.
Yeah.
And so everybody, if you are under regular stress, you're dealing with emotional pain, you need to get a break from it. You need to have relaxation time.
How about those people who feel guilty? Like I'm thinking about my siblings, and there's so many kids in our family, all that stuff. So the mom, who's stressed out in emotional pain, but she's a mom, so she almost is like, I'm supposed to be in raising kids. Yeah, raising these kids or having this job. Like, that's just what it's going to be. How do you address somebody who's like kind of dealing with the fact that I can't just be taking breaks like that because I got 5 kids or however many kids.
It's challenging when you're a parent, but when I say it all the time, when the mother suffers, the children suffer. And so mothers, you are not to be suffering. You need to find time to take a break. Mm-hmm. There were times when my kids would be like running around the house. I would go into the garage and like hide out and read a magazine for 10 minutes.
You hid from your kids?
For 10 minutes. Yes.
Mom?
Oh, are you kidding? I literally had a friend that would go in the bathroom and her kids thought that she had like stomach issues. She didn't have stomach issues. There was a lock on that door, and she would just sit in the bathroom and take deep breaths and read a magazine.
That's
and she'd
funny.
be
I
there
get
for
it.
like 2 hours.
I think my sister does that.
For 10 minutes.
You've taught me a ton about dealing with that emotional, all the emotional situations, like making sure that I'm my best for whatever's coming up next in life. What are some other thoughts you have as it relates to dealing with emotional pain? Just broad stroke thoughts in dealing with it.
Yeah, I think you really have to examine, and I sort of hit on this a little bit before, if there is a person or situation that is causing your pain. It could be a job. You could literally have a job that is causing pain. Now, most of us can't just like leave our job and have no money, but that's when you want to start to strategize, what else can I do? How can I begin to get out? Or how can I make this job better?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's your neighbor. Maybe it's who is it? What's happening? And what can I begin to do to focus in, if I have to have, that job, that person in my life, how can I begin to sort of protect myself so that I'm not having pain inflicted on me?
Yeah, that's huge. I was, while you're talking, I was thinking about a scenario where I was talking to a friend who was dealing with emotional pain as it relates to relationships and all that stuff we've mentioned. And I talked about something that worked for me really well, which was, I call it clearing the runway. Yeah, I was on a plane and they were saying, we're circling here, we're waiting for the runway to be clear or whatever. And then they actually ended up diverting to another place because the runway at the destination was not clear. And in that moment, I thought, like, in order for us to land there had to be nothing in the way of our landing. And I believe in a lot of scenarios in my life, I've wanted peace, I've wanted emotional rest, I've wanted resolve, but I won't clear the runway that allows that to land in my life. And there are a lot of things, a mother can't clear the runway of her kids, but she can do strategic things. But in most cases, there are things that we can do that will actually clear the space for peace to land in our lives.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I just want to add something, because a lot of people end up focusing on sort of worrying and negativity. And you're talking about making space, which I think is a positive action. And so to me, that's where gratitude comes in, and focusing on the positive. Sometimes you're creating your own pain because you're busy about worrying about what's coming on the runway next, or what is on the runway. It's like, okay, clear the runway and then focus on what can I do with this space now, and begin to look at sort of positive options for your life.
I love it. You're a beast. Stacy's a beast. We're going to wrap up this episode with one question that I thought was very interesting. It says, here's a question. Well, I've been in therapy for years, but spent the first 6 years of my life in foster care and had a crazy childhood after being adopted. And I was curious to know, how do you have like a healthy relationship with yourself emotionally when you're dealing with all that at the same time? Like you're having to relive like that kind of childhood, like foster care, adoption, a different, like how do you?
Well, there's nothing that we can do about the past that we came from, and they're not in it now, this person. So what I would tell them to do is to begin to think about what did they get out of that adoption experience? What did they get out of that foster care experience? And maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was that they survived it. And so then you just can say to yourself, I survived a really difficult situation. I survived being in a situation where I didn't have, parents intact like everyone else does. And that makes me strong. And so now I'm going to work towards building a life where I can have the kind of nurturing that maybe I didn't get as a child.
That right there encapsulates what this whole thing is about, which is the power of perspective. Like changing your perspective can change everything. And that's what you've helped me do. And that's what I'm so glad you're here for as related to these folks who are watching. Thank you for watching this episode. We'll be back with some more with my friend Stacy Kaiser. We will see you very, very soon.